were saying that we were going to potentially have the intention of just being, or to just be while we were sitting, and see how that goes, and what came up around it. So for me, it was really interesting. I think I have to sit a little bit more because it was hard for me to even focus on the idea of just being. I was like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, okay, maybe my mind is not that settled. But seeing that the mind is not that settled when you're attempting to just be, to me, is a pretty, useful observation. So everything just gets thrown into the hopper. It doesn't matter what the result is. If your mind is busy and distracted and running around, the fact that you get to notice that and take stock of that is your Zen practice. That's it. You did it. Yay. So, whatever state you're in, that's the state you're in. And there's no good or bad in that sense. So then I said, well, maybe you can focus a little bit on just being and see how that goes. And I noticed there were some other little dictates sneaking in, and that I didn't necessarily ordinarily acknowledge. A little comment came in from the sides like, just sit really still, don't move. And I identified that dictate as not coming from Zen practice, but coming from the ego, or whatever you would like to call the aspect of yourself or mind that wants to look good. It's like, look like a really experienced practitioner and don't move an inch. You can stay still the entire time and you'll look really experienced. So I thought that was great. And the last thing I'll say about myself before I invite your comments is that it occurred to me, it's like, am I really, a decent Zen practitioner if I'm having thoughts like that? And I decided that the difference between being a Zen practitioner and just being somebody who has egoic thoughts, if there is one, is that perhaps you're able to take stock of those thoughts and acknowledge them and see that they have a kind of their own intention to give you a better self-presentation, and somehow make you look like you're okay, which is a lot different than whether you are okay or whether you're, feel okay. So I'll leave it at that for now and ask you if you want to share what your experience of engaging with just being was like. The idea that you're breathing, that's the bottom line reality, and that those thoughts about whether it's too fast or too slow or, anything else about it. And that makes me think, maybe you'd think to yourself, am I being really aware of the breath or am I not so aware, But all those different thoughts about the qualitative, or maybe that's the quantitative. They're really mental constructs that you're imposing on the just being, right? The reality, and to notice that the reality is that you're actually just breathing. There, outside of the mind, there really aren't any evaluations of whether something is correct or incorrect or right or wrong. Right. And so we're generating all that ourselves all the time. So then, like like the just sitting thing from the other week, the question is, when all that stuff comes up and you're going like, is my breathing fast? Is it slow? And you're kind of evaluating it. Can you include that in just being? In other words, just being is just being with whatever's there. So you can either go, I don't want to have those judgments. I don't want to be judgmental. Or you can say, oh, judgments and evaluations coming up. Good to acknowledge. Okay. I wonder what's next. Taking the 20 minutes to settle down, I think that's pretty normal for most of us. especially under lay circumstances where
Yeah.
we're not in a quiet monastic setting. Not that a monastic setting is necessarily always quiet, but you know, we're starting from a lot of activity and then winding down. I always find that the beginning part of my sitting is always a lot of stuff unwinding and a lot of junk. But the fact that if you take 20 minutes and you know and wind down and settle down, that you can then you know do a little bit of other kind of sitting that's a little more settled.
Right.
That's pretty good actually. I mean, that's nice. A, that you're able to do that, and B, if you take the time to sit for 40 minutes, that's a pretty good practice. So that's number one. My other reaction to it is more radical, which is, you know, for somebody who's really advanced and who's been sitting up for a long time, uh, which is don't, you know, not to count that turbulent part of the sitting as not the practice or not being settled or not to regard it as anything, but just to be present for it and like, okay, turbulent practice. Here we go. Crazy sitting. You know, I'm up for it. You know, rather than waiting for it to subside so you can get down to work.
Right.
So I think that's a really difficult, you know, notion to entertain, but I think it's a really rewarding one because if you can establish, you know, sort of equanimitous uh, point of view towards a non-equanimitous uh, situation, like internal, you know, craziness, and you can kind of say, okay, I'm here for that. I'm going to open up to that, and I'm still, you know, practicing. That's a kind of practice that you can more easily take into the real world with you so that when you know when you're trying to reach the customer service person at Verizon, you know, you don't go completely insane.
Right.
Say, this is the nature of samsara, and I'm up for it. You know, I know it's going to be impossible to reach anyone, and I'm just going to use that for my practice. I'm going to practice just being here with that. So I would just kind of invite you and myself to, you know, take the whole ball of wax, whatever comes up, and say, okay, that's the practice. Let's be present for that, you know, rather than getting caught up in it or trying to make it go away or waiting for it to subside, say, this is the practice until it changes into something else. And I think, you know, I tend to judge my process if it doesn't seem like it's cool, you know, like, oh God, I'm so jumpy all the time. I'm not really, you know, I don't look like the Buddha in the statue, you know, I'm more like Roadrunner, you know. So I just think for myself, I'd like to not judge that and just see that as part of phenomenon that's arising. Thanks. So while we're waiting to see if anybody else has comment, question, query, uh, agreement, objection, or any other form of response, I would just like to say a little bit more about this issue of just being, as if just being, in other words, being present, being yourself, just being here, uh, you know, shikantaza, just sitting, um, not having that constant mild dukkha of wanting things to be different or thinking they're not quite right, but just being with what is. I think that even if we try to do that, we have a tendency to turn it into an idealized state and have an image of what just being or just sitting should be like. Like it should be very calm and we should have a very successful deep samadhi and we should be in a happier state. And, you know, if things do come up, we're able to easily, you know, let them go. We're just being with everything and everything is sort of more balanced and more equanimous. And I don't think that that's I don't think that that's not a part of Zen practice. I think being able to access a deeper, more balanced state is an important part of Zen practice. But if we're looking at the ability to defeat that little constant dukkha of things are not quite right. I wish it was a little bit different. They should be a little better. If I was doing this instead, I would be happier. Um, I shouldn't be doing this right now. I should be doing something else. And I think that's a very persistent quality of the human mind that makes us feel that we're never here. We're never completely here and settled into this actual current reality, which is really all there is. So if we have an idealized image of just being or presence or shikantaza, just sitting, then it becomes another tool for not being here. Because we think it's supposed to be a certain way, and if it's not, then it should be different. So I just want to invite us to consider just being with exactly the way it is, with all of our flaws and imperfections, our inabilities to concentrate or practice completely, whatever it is we think is a little bit off, that we say, that thing that's a little bit off, or that personality factor of mine that I really can't accept because I wish it would change, that we say, that's perfect the way it is for purposes of just being. It's okay the way it is, and I'm not trying to change it. And then maybe for a very brief period of time, we can settle into allowing this, the way it is right now, to be the way it is, and not try to, I was going to say a bad word, not try to mess around with it and alter it in some way. So it goes along a little bit with one of my favorite statements of Huangbo, which I just take out of context from one of his talks, but I don't remember the rest of the talk. So he said, I will let go with both hands. And I think that's such a wonderful summary of what there is to not do, to just give up the project of making things different and just be with the imperfect exactness of the way it is. So I think, why don't we take 5 minutes to just play with that and sit again, and then we'll talk a little bit more. Okay, folks, we are back from sitting, and I have to say that was a very nice 5 minutes, and it seemed long, but like in a nice way, like a vacation sitting. What did you? How did you feel about the? I mean, the first sitting sounds great to me. Just being with the sensations. I mean, that doesn't seem self-indulgent to me. It seems like a really nice. It seems like a really nice way to sit. One thing I would say about that one is that it's a variation of something that someone once said to me, which is don't think that there's something wrong with what you're doing just because you're enjoying
Yeah.
it. Yeah, the practice can be nice. That's great. If stuff comes up that makes it more difficult and you have to go through certain obstacles, that those are provided by your personal store of memories and nervous system and karma, and it's great to sit through those and work with them. But if you're given a really pleasant sitting and you're just being there, that's kind of the ideal state. That's great. You can just acknowledge it and have a good time. And maybe that's what just being is like, when you're just being and not worrying about it. That oneness period sounds pretty good. Being connected to everything, um, and coming back is probably good too. Being back in the body, so the body can fall away a little bit, and it can come back, and that's part of the experience. But it's nice to experience these different things and different aspects of being. And I think that one of the nice things about the idea of just being is that rather than picking and choosing experiences and thinking, well, you know, uh, I really need to have a big, gigantic enlightenment experience at sometime in the near future, or the whole thing is BS. What does it add up to if I'm not having gigantic peak experiences? Or on the other hand, thinking to yourself, yeah, I'm not supposed to worry about anything like that. I'm supposed to just sit. And if I'm worrying about anything, then my practice is not that great. So what's nice about the idea of just being, if you really universalize it, is that when you're having a special experience, it's great. And when you're having an ordinary experience, it's great. You don't have to worry about anything. I mean, I really think that ultimately our practice, you might want to do some things and get some things straight in practice at different times. Get the posture and the mudra and the hand mudra and the tongue mudra, and have things in order so that you know what the basic parameters of the traditional practice are. So there are things to do and kind of organize your practice. But then once you've got all that going for a while, it's good to just accept whatever comes and not have a requirement, because it might be interesting to observe this sometime too. What part of the mind is holding up all these standards and requirements for you about what you're supposed to be doing and what you're supposed to be experiencing? The only thing that's really absolute is the fact that at any given moment, you're definitely going to be experiencing something. And that is the appropriate object for inquiry at that particular moment. It's like, what's happening now? So I think that the fact that you went to those different places is just indicative of kind of like letting go a little bit, and not having an agenda, and seeing what the practice wants to do, which I think is great. Just like when we start out, we learn the posture and we learn the mudra and all that stuff. But that's not necessarily the core of the practice. It is the setup of the practice. It's the structure of the practice. But then within that, there's, God knows what the actual practice of being present and mindfulness and breath and koans and all the practice, uh, you know, uh, tools and procedures that we have that are not about that outer structure. So I would just liken the, trying to work with as a similar kind of thing. It's a structural thing. So it's not necessarily the core of your teaching or how you develop as a teacher, but it is a parameter for how to build your house, so that you can teach more comfortably and more effectively. So that to me, it's like just being is one thing that always applies, to be with whatever is and accept whatever is as it is. But that doesn't mean that you can't develop skills or work on things. It's just like at any given point when you're working on those skills, are you accepting and being with those, in the current state of that? And then you can apply, just being present to whatever that is and still keep working on it. And it reminds me of the universally deceptively simple statement of Suzuki Roshi's that you're perfect the way you are and you can use a little improvement. And the balance between those two, both of which are always true, is a really great koan. Because you want to accept and be with what is, which is perfect in its own right. And you also want to reserve the right to improve and develop. So both of those are there at the same time. But if you're not able to be with and accept things as they are, then it makes the process of development much more painful. I think it's really great to be able to look at our teachers and advanced practitioners and to see what they've been able to accomplish in terms of their skills and composure and the way they deal with things. There's another way to develop as a teacher that's not about trying to be as well composed or as deep as you can possibly be. And that is to give students the gift of being yourself and being the way you are. And showing up the way you are and not trying to sugarcoat it or make believe you're in samadhi when you're not. So I just think that that's another wonderful aspect of, developing towards a deep and equilibrious, not a word, state, is wonderful. And it's great to have those skills and develop them through your practice. But the gift of being more and more open and just being present the way you are is such an enormous gift that we don't get in everyday life. And I think a teacher, who's vulnerable enough to present that is really a wonderful teacher. The Buddha said in, I think, the Dhammapada, where he said, I think it's Ananda, but it could have been one of the other disciples. He said, Ananda or somebody says to him, I understand that you have said that, that having a sangha, having the company of good friends on the path is 50% of the holy life. And the Buddha answers, don't ever say that it's 50% of the holy life, that having the company of good spiritual friends is the whole of the holy. And that is that's the lay practice where you're able to see your teacher doing ordinary activities. Well, I guess it's probably the right time to close off the session. And so I really have enjoyed being with you and the sittings and the comments and discussion, as well as some of our other important topics that we covered at the end here. So great session, great to be with you. Thank you for being my extended Zen family, and really appreciate it. Take good care.